The Return of the King. A 14-week course studying the Book of Revelation. Over the following 14 weeks, we will cover the Book of Revelation and other books which teach of the end times, aiming to provide a clearer understanding of its content. We intend to present a biblically centered look at the book and create a space for reflection and engagement to bring the storyline to life. During the 14 weeks, we will cover the following. Week 1. God's Promises and Israel's History. Week 2. Why should we study the Book of Revelation, and what is the best interpretation to take? Week 3. Chapters 1 to 5. The End Times Overview. Letters to the Churches and the Throne Room in Heaven. Week 4. Chapters 12 to 13. The Antichrist, covering Old and New Testament verses. Week 5. Chapter 6. The Seven Seals. Week 6. Chapters 8, 9 and 11. The Seven Trumpets. Week 7. Chapters 10 and 11. The Temple, the Two Witnesses, the Angel with the Scroll. Week 8. Chapters 7 and 14. The 144,000, the Three Angels and the Great Harvest. Week 9. Chapters 15 to 16. The Seven Bowls. Week 10. Chapters 17 to 18. Mystery Babylon. Week 11. Chapter 19 to 20. The Return of Jesus. Week 12. Chapters 20 to 22. The Millennium Reign, Judgment Day, the Marriage Supper of the Lamb and the New Jerusalem. Week 13. Deception and the Great Apostasy. Week 14. Finally, to ground all this information for our lives today, we will look at the end times parables of Jesus. Week 1. God's Promises and Israel's History. Before we begin exploring the Book of Revelation, it's important to first understand the promises God made early on in the Bible to his people. We need to see what God said to the early Jewish people and the promises he gave them before we can fully grasp the conclusion of the biblical story, including Jesus' second coming. This background includes the beginning of the Jewish nation, the formation of Israel, and God's words to the Jewish people. From there, we move on to Jesus, the New Testament, and finally, the Book of Revelation. To understand Revelation, we need to view it with the whole Bible in mind, from beginning to end, and not just focus on the individual book itself. A study of the return of Jesus and the end times is dependent on a factual understanding of the historical kingdom of Israel and the current state of Israel. The reason for this dependency is that when we study end times from the Bible, Israel is interwoven with the story. But first, why did God favor one nation? And why is Israel that nation? Just as you love your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, so God loved Adam and his descendants. God chose Abraham because he obeyed God's call. He was prepared to leave his comfort zone to follow God. Genesis 12, verses 1 to 2 say, "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.'" We know the story. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was born from union with Sarah's handmaid, while Isaac was the child of promise, because he was born directly as a result of God's promise to Abraham and Sarah. From Isaac came Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel, the one who wrestles with God. And so God's covenant to Abraham ultimately belonged to Israel and his descendants. God chose Israel not because of their size or strength, but out of love and faithfulness to his covenant. Israel's ultimate purpose was to bring forth the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who would save humanity from sin and death. While Israel was also meant to serve as a nation that pointed others to God and his promises, they often failed in that mission. To be an Israelite in the days of the Old Testament did not feel like a blessing. There were extreme penalties for breaking God's law. They were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. They wandered homeless in the desert for 40 years. Once in the Promised Land, they were constantly under attack from neighboring tribes. To be an Israelite did not feel like special favor. It was a far easier life to be a native of a heathen nation. After Israel was taken captive into Babylon, a string of empires governed their homeland. The Jews were scattered throughout the world, facing anti-Semitism wherever they went. Hitler murdered 6 million Jews in the 1940s. To be clear, by the 20th century, much of the world viewed Jews as cursed, not blessed. Nonetheless, God's plan to redeem mankind was fulfilled perfectly through Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection 2,000 years ago. Jesus' ancestry is traced through his adoptive father Joseph, all the way back to Adam, through King David and Abraham. And so it was through Jesus that the promise given to Abraham came true. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Through Abraham came Jesus, and through Jesus came salvation to whosoever believes. Let's now fast forward to 1948, the year that the modern state of Israel was inaugurated. If we doubt that the modern state of Israel were descendants of the patriarchs of the Bible, or if we doubt that the modern state of Israel was legitimate, we will soon run into problems understanding the end times story as it weaves through the Old and New Testament. Let's see how Israel is connected to the end times biblical narrative. 1. One of the foundational end time prophecies was given to a Jew, Daniel. 2. Following Daniel, there were end times prophecies given to Isaiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Zechariah, and Amos, who are all Jews. These prophecies speak of judgment for Israel, followed by a period of prosperity during which the son of David will rule not only the house of Jacob, but the whole earth. 3. When Jesus described the end times, he said that when those in Judea see the abomination that causes desolation standing in the holy place, they should flee. A warning to Jews regarding the Antichrist's sudden stop to sacrifices and offerings, when he will also set up an abomination in the temple. This description of a future tribulation period is meaningless if there is no Jewish temple and no nation of Israel. 4. Describing the same time is the text from Luke 21 verse 20. Jesus says, "When you see the armies surround Jerusalem, you will know that its desolation is near." 5. The temple is also mentioned in the book of Revelation chapter 11. This chapter also describes two witnesses who minister and die in Jerusalem. 6. The book of Revelation chapter 12 describes a woman who we understand to be Israel. The dragon pursues the woman who is helped to escape to the desert, where she is sustained by God for 1260 days. This period matches the period of time which the beast of Revelation 13 is allowed to have authority over the world. 7. In Revelation 16, we read that the Antichrist gathers the kings of many countries for battle on the great day of the Lord. The place where they gather is called Armageddon. It is a historical site in the Jezreel Valley in Israel. 8. Finally, in Revelation 19, we see that the New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven, and God describes her as the bride, the wife of the Lamb. On the gates of this city are inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. To summarize then, biblical end times prophecy was given to the Jews and is about events in Israel. It describes a people of Israel with a temple, who are persecuted by the Antichrist and who are finally ruled by the Son of David, Jesus, the Son of God. Therefore, we can conclude, without a shadow of doubt, that Israel plays a big role in the biblical end times narrative. So how did the people of Israel become attached to the land known to many as Palestine? God first mentioned land ownership around 2000 BC when he promised Abraham in Genesis 17 verse 8. "The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God." Again in Genesis 15 verse 18, God says, "To your descendants I will give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river Euphrates." The Wadi of Egypt most often refers to a dry riverbed in the Sinai Peninsula that flows to the Mediterranean Sea near the town of El Arish. We know from the Bible that the people of Israel are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were led out of Egyptian slavery by God's miracle power, and through the leadership of Joshua, they entered the land of Canaan and begun to militarily conquer cities in that land. Around the year 1000 BC, King David ruled over Israel, and he conquered Jerusalem, and later his son Solomon built the first Jewish temple in Jerusalem. But today, can any one people justify their claim to Jerusalem and the land known to many as Palestine? Looking at the chart above, you can see that the original inhabitants were Canaanites, conquered by the Israelites, who remained until Babylon took Israel captive. Persia then ruled this land, followed by the Greeks and the Romans. In AD 70, the Romans, under Emperor Titus, put down a Jewish revolt and destroyed the Second Temple, built earlier by Herod. In the very place where Herod's temple stood, Titus built a temple dedicated to the god of Jupiter. The Romans were the first to name the Judean province as Syria Palestina. The word Palestine means Philistine, an Aegean people from Greece and Crete who settled in Gaza and Ashkelon. The Roman Emperor Hadrian renamed the land in an attempt to erase the link between Jews and their historical kingdom. There is no longer a Philistine people group. Their people and culture were absorbed into the various kingdoms who conquered them. The Romans also placed a ban on any Jew entering the city of Jerusalem, which lasted for hundreds of years. Next to conquer Jerusalem were the Byzantians, the eastern arm of the Roman Empire, who had accepted Christianity and built churches and monuments to the life and death of Christ in Jerusalem. Then came a new people, not a nation, but rather followers of a religion, in the form of the Islamic caliphates, who built the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. On a positive, they showed religious tolerance and allowed Jews back into Jerusalem, ending the Roman ban. Around the turn of the first millennium, Crusaders from Western Europe defeated the ruling caliphate and governed Jerusalem for around 90 years. These Crusaders used warfare and violence against Jews, Byzantine Christians and Muslims to gain dominance, so they were definitely not showing the compassion of Jesus. They built monasteries and hostels, which were visited by a stream of Christian pilgrims during their rule. By 1187, the Saladin Caliphate brought Jerusalem back under Islamic control. This continued under the Ottoman Empire, all the way up to the end of World War I, when the defeat of the Ottoman Empire resulted in the Middle East being carved up between the French and the British. Britain was handed the area known as Palestine and Jordan. Following the Balfour Treaty, Jews were supported to return to Palestine. However, the British failed to manage the growing hostilities between local Arabs and returning Jews. Eventually, the management of Palestine was given to the United Nations. The UN General Assembly passed Resolution 181, the Partition Plan, in November 1947, which recommended dividing mandatory Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem under international administration. There is no logical reason for a single people group to have a claim on Jerusalem. The most recent historical governor of this land, Britain, would have no appetite to claim the land. Previous governors of this land no longer exist as a distinct people. The Mamluk dynasty is integrated with Egyptians, Syrians, and Jordanians, and no longer exist as a people. The Ottoman Empire was located in modern-day Turkey, but in 1922 the empire collapsed. Modern-day Turkey was founded, and the Ottoman royal family was exiled into Europe and America. However, there is one people group who have not been absorbed into other cultures, despite being flung far and wide: the Jews. They have definitely shown an appetite to regain this land. If you place them side by side with the Canaanites, the Romans, and the Islamic caliphates, they appear to have no logical advantage in terms of historical length of rule. But the ownership of this land is not resolved by logic. It is resolved by God's covenant promise, which he made to Abraham and his descendants. To deny that the land belongs to the Jews is to deny that God keeps his word. On May 14 of 1948, as the British mandate ended, David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, read the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel in Tel Aviv. This was an independent decision by the Jewish leadership in Palestine, based partly on the legitimacy they drew from the UN plan, but not executed by the UN itself. The Arab states and Palestinian Arab leadership rejected the UN partition plan and accepted neither the Declaration of Israel nor the UN-recommended Arab partition. The next day, neighbouring Arab armies invaded, leading to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. During this war, 700,000 Arabs fled Israel. Some fled voluntarily, some were expelled. The event was named the Nakba. Some see this as an example of ethnic cleansing. However, it was a result of the attack by the neighbouring Arab countries, not a premeditated expulsion of Arabs. Those Arabs who remained, and numbered around 150,000, which was 25% of Israel's population, were given Israeli citizenship and the right to vote by 1952. If the Nakba was a move by Israel to cleanse the land of Arabs, why were the Arabs who remained treated with respect? See the UN partition plan. An armistice in 1949, agreed with Egypt, Jordan, Syria and Lebanon, left Israel in control of more territory than the UN partition plan had called for, and no new independent Arab state was created, as the rest of the former Mandate territory was held by Egypt and Jordan, respectively the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Why then is there such a dispute between non-Israeli Arabs and Israel over Jerusalem and the land of Palestine? Firstly, there is bad history. You could go back to the day that Abraham decided to make God's promise come true by sleeping with Sarah's handmaid, instead of trusting God for a miracle in 90-year-old Sarah's womb. Fast forward 13 years, and Sarah could not bear to see the teenager Ishmael mocking her son Isaac, and so drove Ishmael and his mother Hagar out of Abraham's house. Can you imagine the rejection and the hurt in the heart of Ishmael? But to bring this up to date, the carving up of the Middle East after World War I was not done in good faith, with the leader of the Arab revolt, Sharif Hussein bin Ali of Mecca. In 1916, Britain made promises regarding Arab independence to this leader if he could defeat the Ottoman Empire, who, together with Germany and Austria, formed the central axis of power in World War I. The Arab revolt was successful, and the Ottoman Empire defeated, which helped the Allies defeat Germany. However, following the war, it was France and Britain who were rewarded with land in the Middle East. Sharif Hussein bin Ali was eventually given rulership of the desert land of Arabia, while his sons were given rulership of Iraq and Jordan. Having already established themselves as an unfaithful party, Britain then invited Jews into the land of Israel against the wishes of resident Arabs. Without an acceptance of Israel's history in the land, Arabs took the view that the British were once again acting in bad faith and giving away their land. Then there is the clash of faiths. All concerned, including broad Islamic tradition, recognize that the Dome of the Rock was built over the location of the Temple of Solomon. Muslims claim that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built next to the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, is one of their most holiest sites, preceded only by Mecca. Muslim tradition teaches that Muhammad ascended on a night journey from Mecca to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This tradition persists, despite factual evidence that this mosque was built between AD 692 and AD 705, whereas Muhammad died in AD 632. Furthermore, the mention of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Quran simply translates as the farthest mosque. Early Islamic historians, and the Salafi sect of Muslims, hold that Al-Aqsa refers to a mosque in the Saudi peninsula named Al-Jarana. Some Muslims, who face the fact that Muhammad died before the Jerusalem Al-Aqsa Mosque was built, try to bypass this contradiction by explaining that he travelled from Mecca to a sacred worship precinct on Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The problem with this explanation is that there was no Muslim presence in Jerusalem before AD 632. At the time, Jerusalem was under Byzantine rule and was not conquered by Islamic forces until AD 637. Despite all this evidence, Jews are now caught in limbo, as their most holiest site is covered by an Islamic monument, the Dome of the Rock, which in turn is twinned to a mosque which, contrary to facts, is supposedly the mosque mentioned in the Quran. Despite a very tolerant approach to the Muslim religion, whereby Israel in 1967 agreed for the Temple Mount to be under Jordanian, not Israeli control, non-Israeli Palestinian Arabs are easily persuaded by the various Iranian-funded terrorist groups to protest against Israel, often with violence and deadly attacks. What about the current Israeli government? Why are they accused of committing genocide? Are they not simply acting in self-defense? There have been many wars between Israel and its neighbors. All have been provoked by terrorist activity coming from the neighboring nation. The Suez Crisis is often cited as a clear-cut case of a war which Israel provoked against Egypt. However, to believe that, you would need to turn a blind eye to the cross-border raids made by Egypt which targeted Israeli citizens leading up to this war. On the other hand, groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah have made it very clear that their intention is to eradicate Jews from the land, a clear case of intended genocide. Hamas have no strategy to prioritize the well-being of Palestinians. Instead, they use their own citizens as human shields. Consider that while Israel is criticized so harshly, they are the only country that employs the roof-knocking low explosive bomb to notify civilians in a building before carrying out an attack. Israel also employ all the methods used by Western militaries to protect civilians, which include texting, loud hailer announcements, and leaflet dropping, to inform civilians of imminent attacks. Between 2015 and 2022, the UN General Assembly passed more resolutions condemning Israel than any other country combined, often ignoring far worse crises like Syria's civil war or China's treatment of Uyghurs. Singling out Israel in global forums is a well-documented pattern. Human rights abusers, such as Iran, North Korea, China, Saudi Arabia, or Sudan, often escape scrutiny while leading criticism against Israel. Accusations are made against Israel by Iran, Turkey, and South Africa, while the human rights records of those same countries are off the chart. It appears that these countries are simply trying to deflect attention away from themselves by pointing the finger at Israel. Is the modern state of Israel composed of a mix of Europeans, Russians, and Americans who simply want to leave the countries they were born in to live in the Middle East? Or are these people direct descendants of Abraham? The modern state of Israel is a mixture of several Jewish populations: European, Russian, and American Jews. Many Jews in Israel today are Ashkenazi, whose families lived in Europe, Russia, or North America. These communities migrated to Israel during the late 19th-20th centuries, Zionist Aliyah movements, and after World War II. They are not recent converts. They have a Jewish lineage that traditionally traces back to the ancient Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, though separated by millennia and migrations. Middle Eastern and North African Jews, known as Mizrahi and Sephardi. Many Israeli Jews descend from communities in Iraq, Yemen, Iran, Morocco, and other Arab lands. These communities often remained in the Middle East for centuries and claim continuous descent from ancient Israelites. 3. Genetic studies. Genetic research shows that most Jewish populations share a common Middle Eastern ancestry, consistent with historical claims of descent from the Israelites. Despite differences from living in Europe or elsewhere for centuries, the core genetic markers link Jews worldwide back to the Levant. 4. Conclusion. Israelis today include 1. Jews with ancestral ties to the Middle East. 2. Jews from Europe, Russia, and the Americas who migrated in the 19th-20th centuries but still trace ancestry to the ancient Israelites. So, modern Israel is not just a mix of expatriates who have moved to the Middle East, but a state populated by people who identify as descendants of the biblical Israelites, albeit through centuries of diaspora and migration. Is the modern state of Israel a hotbed of paganism and LGBT ideology? And if so, do they still fit the remit of the people that will receive the returning Messiah? 50% of Israelis identify as secular, and the remaining half identify with varying degrees of Jewish religious observance, ranging from Masorti, traditional, to Haredi, ultra-Orthodox. As far as LGBT ideology, Tel Aviv and Haifa actively fund and support LGBT initiatives and market LGBT tourism. Tel Aviv is seen as Israel's gay capital, in a similar way to San Francisco in America and Berlin and Amsterdam in Europe. Nevertheless, all Jews are descendants of Abraham, and therefore are inheritors of the land. We know that God will accept the earnest repentance of any person, regardless of the depravity of their past sin. However, currently, most Jews in Israel view Jesus as a historical figure who was theologically in error, and so began the false religion of Christianity. This belief is held by both secular and religious Jews. But there is hope. Jews are beginning to come to faith in Jesus through ministries like One for Israel. What about the Orthodox Jews in the land of Israel? Interestingly, many of the ultra-Orthodox Jews, Haredi, do not believe that the state of Israel is God-ordained. Therefore, many do not attend state education, but instead have set up their own education system that almost exclusively studies the Torah. Many do not receive state benefits and do not serve in national service. They believe that only the Messiah can rule the land of Israel. They also would consider a third temple built by the state of Israel to be illegitimate, as it can only be built by the Messiah himself. What is replacement theology, and how did this come about? Replacement theology is the theological view which holds that the church has replaced Israel in God's plan. So therefore, this view believes that God's promises to the Jewish people are now fulfilled in the Christian church. Certain passages in the New Testament have been interpreted to support this idea. For instance, Matthew 21 verse 43, where Jesus says to the religious Pharisees, "I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation that will produce the proper fruit." The early church fathers, like Augustine, wrote extensively on the idea that Israel had been replaced spiritually by the church, not least because the Jews had refused to accept Jesus, but also the destruction of the Jewish temple in AD 70. was seen as God's judgment on Israel. But to replace Israel, one has to ignore God's promises, especially regarding the last days. For instance, in Isaiah 2 verse 2, it says, "In the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and all nations will stream to it." In Isaiah 49 verse 15, God says to Zion, "Can a woman forget her nursing child and have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, but I will not forget you. Behold, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands." Amos 9 verses 14 to 15 say, "I will bring my people Israel back from exile. I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted." Jeremiah 31 verses 31 to 34 say, "The days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." Jeremiah 23 verses 5 and 6 say, "The days are coming when I will raise up for David a righteous branch. In his day Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety." Isaiah 60 verses 14 to 16 says, "The children of your oppressors will come bowing before you. All who despise you will bow down at your feet and will call you the city of the Lord, Zion of the Holy One of Israel. Although you have been forsaken and hated, with no one traveling through, I will make you the everlasting pride and the joy of all generations. You will drink the milk of nations and be nursed at royal breasts. Then you will know that I, the Lord, am your Saviour, your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob." Finally, Zechariah 14 verse 4 and 9 say, "On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. The Lord will be king over the whole earth." These promises of greatness, safety, prosperity, honour, and spiritual revival are all made to Israel, and they will be fulfilled when Jesus returns to rule as king over Israel. To insert the church into these scriptures is to say that the Bible does not mean what it says. Replacement theology only brings confusion to the believer and dishonour to Israel. Replacement theology refuses to believe the great plans that God has for Israel and the earth in the millennium. Finally, consider these words. Gabriel spoke to Mary about her miracle baby in Luke 1 verse 32 and 33. "The Lord will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end." And although Jesus' first mission to earth was not to rule over Israel, the people cry prophetically in John 12 verse 13, "Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel, who comes in the name of the Lord." Again, the Bible records that Pilate prophetically put a sign on Jesus' cross, which read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." The question to ask is this: if God had replaced Israel, why would he promise that Jesus will reign over the house of Jacob? To summarize, before we begin to study biblical end times, we need to understand that the modern state of Israel are the descendants of Abraham. This nation is a miracle. It is a nation born in one day. It is the beginning of the fulfillment of God's promises to the Jews. While they are currently mainly still in unbelief, the events of the end times will bring calamity, persecution, repentance, and eventually joy and redemption. They are the cup of wrath which the nations will drink. But they will also be the pride and joy of all generations when Jesus begins to rule from Jerusalem.